Welcome everybody to the sixth episode of Rise Up Full. My guest today is Jasiel Lopez from the Centro De Trabajadores Unidos, or from CTU. So Jasiel, I want to jump right into the first two questions I ask everyone, because
Mhm.
this is a podcast where I interview Latino organizers. Is I always ask first how they identify in terms of their Latino, Latinx identity. So how do you
Mhm.
identify?
Sure. Well, hello, and thank you for having me on, Arturo. I Latinx is how I used to identify. That's I know, like, here in Chicago and other places like Chicano or Chicanx thing, but I think Latinx for me is what I normally identify as.
And in terms of being an organizer, I'd like to know just a little bit about you as an organizer. And so, just kind of, what's the first thing you got involved with, or the first thing you either volunteered or protest, and then sort of how that led you to what you're doing now and what it is that you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this recently, and I'm not sure like what would be like the first thing I consider like my first action or like experience as an organizer. I mean, I do think I think where the first thing that really led to where I am, I would say is really after like the 2016 election, and I know that's like where for a lot of people that was like a turning point. I think that was definitely for me. I mean, I was in college. I was like, soon to graduate, and well, I mean, it goes further back, right? I think we can point there, but my background, I was born in Mexico. My family immigrated here when I was 7. So I lived, undocumented and still undocumented. Um, and one thing, obviously the Trump rhetoric that started being really like prevalent during that election year, really like took me off being someone who's a undocumented immigrant and having undocumented family members and undocumented friends. Like, that's something that really made me afraid for myself and for my community. So I think one of the first things is I was really involved in my local church back in Florida. I grew up in Florida for most of my life, and there was this, Trump got elected, and we're like, shit, what does this mean? He talked a big game about supporting immigrants, and so I got together with some friends. None of us were really organizers, none of us were really activists. Like, we didn't really identify us that way, and we said, holy shit, like, we got to do something. And so and let me know if cursing is okay.
Yeah, it's,
I don't know that we didn't talk
it's
about
all
it,
right.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
um and so we're like, we got to do like a know your rights workshop. Like, this church is like 99% like immigrant. It's like like many of the people here are undocumented. Like, we gotta do something. And it's like, it was like a really big church that they didn't really pay attention to us when we spoke with the leaders. They were like, yeah, like, whatever. Like, they weren't really like, they seemed sympathetic, but they weren't really like that down for it. But we kept pushing to do something, right? And this is like the thing that we found most like uh adequate to do at the time, right? And so I hit up one of my friends who my he was an organizer. I was like, oh, this is activist guy, he knows, I think he knows what he's talking about, and got some advice from him, like, how to do this. And eventually pushed the church to set up like an event where people can come and like do your rights workshop. Invited like attorneys, and we just like gave folks like some important information to keep themselves safe. And I think, looking back at it now, I think like scenario rights workshops, like, I do them like all the time, and they're not the most important thing, but they're important. And I think then that, however significant it was for the people who were there, it was really significant for me to be like, there's an issue, we can do something about it. And doing something about it like helps people, and people were obviously grateful, and they were like, congratulate us for like doing this. And again, in retrospect, it's like not a big deal, but it is like something that I still feel is what really like allowed me to realize, right, that one can actually do something and actually make an impact. And from then on, right, like I think that the Trump years were a place where a lot of um, there was a lot of action, there was a lot of movement, and I was present throughout that, and that really radicalized, and I really learned so much about myself, about my community, about organizing throughout those years. I the other work that I've done, I focus around like immigrant rights. I'm a DACA recipient, right? So I was working with other undocumented youth, to push for relief, for undocumented youth. And I think my ideas around immigration have expanded since then, right? It's like I think we I don't no longer see it through the lens of like here's a DACA recipient who's like a great immigrant, the model immigrant that deserves legalization or whatnot. And but after that, I work with the coalition of Mockley workers, organizing with them for a spring, and that's like the last time I lived in Florida. Since then, I moved to Chicago, worked with 5 for 15 in Chicago here, and did labor organizing. Was organizing fast food workers in the city, fighting for a minimum wage and the union here in Chicago, and that was before joining CTU, Centro De Trabajadores Unidos, back in May of 2020, where, having this experience working with immigrants, with workers, realizing that intersection is so heavily linked, and knowing that's an important place to be, organizing both workers and immigrants, and fighting for those two things, labor rights and immigrant rights. Yeah, and so that's where I'm here now. I've been with the organization, focused on immigration, right? But recognizing and not just recognizing, but also seeing that, because those things intersect, that they're intertwined in the work that I do, and how I talk to community members.
Let me ask you, because I know there's a lot of us who are consider ourselves either radical or on the left,
Hmm.
who sort of see ourselves as like separate from the church or religion. And it's so
Hmm.
interesting that like your organizing was born like inside of the church, right? Like, and you were pushing the church to do something, but
Right,
still
right.
as a member, right? And I think that when we look at labor organizing, we see that as well, right? Like there's like from the UFW, there's
Hmm.
and on, right, that clergy members get involved. And so I kind of want to know, are you still um, religious, involved in the church, or have as you've become more radicalized, have you left? Kind of like where's there's I feel like sometimes there's like a push and pull there. Like I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
definitely. No, absolutely. I think, yeah, and I think it's complicated, right? I think that it isn't like black and white where like become radicalized. I no longer like associate with any of it. I think there's obviously a lot of harm that religious institutions, you know, have committed, right, throughout colonization, and still to this
Right.
day commit. But there's yeah, I think that religion, that faith is something that drives a lot of people towards justice, and I think it's obviously a matter of how one's philosophy and one's theology. And we know like liberation theology is like on one part of the spectrum in that. So it depends on that. I think for me personally, I grew up evangelical Christian, holding a lot of like negative views of on a whole host of things, right? It's a very
Mhm.
patriarchal sort of like institution. It's very uh, uh, homophobic. It's very uh, racist. There's just like so much
Right.
that the church harms, and where I've come from, right? And obviously rejecting a lot of that, sometimes like my you know sort of like my knee-jerk reactions to reject a lot of like the faith aspect of it, which is not what I don't like actively reject it. I'm not opposed to faith. I still consider myself a Christian, even though I'm not regularly attending church, and that's something that I'm, still exploring. But I think, throughout, you know, my time doing this work, like I've met so many really dope, really radical, like priests, religious leaders who are standing on the side of what they consider justice, and that aligns with a lot of my beliefs as well. And so I don't think that leftist radicals should necessarily, reject religion. I think it's a powerful. I don't want to call it a powerful tool, because that's like, I feel like it is its own thing. But I think a lot of people have faith, and a lot of people believe in God. A lot of people, um, you know, believe in things that are not necessarily or immediately material. And I think it's important to recognize that, acknowledge that, and hold it, and not, reject it as something that's just harmful, because it's not, in itself harmful inherently. It's the way that it's used, and the way that it, people are manipulated into thinking it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%, right? Like I think, and I was raised in a Catholic
Mm-hmm.
uh church, and I left it. I'm not Catholic anymore. I don't go to church,
Mm-hmm.
haven't for many years, but um I think we can talk on and on and on about
Yeah.
the history of that church and
Oh
what it's
yeah.
done in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
I
Definitely.
don't think we need to rehash it all. I think most
Mm-hmm.
of us know, could point to
Yeah.
several examples, right, of the harm it's
Exactly.
done. But when you're out there organizing with people, like you said, like being undocumented, right, and like the fear that comes with that, and like sometimes though the first step for people to like step up and like fight back is having hope, and that's something that faith is really good at. Right, faith,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
more than like even like radical organizations, like faith is really good at giving people hope. Right, and like you need
Yeah.
that in the
Yeah.
fight, you need it in any fight. So like there's certainly like a respect for seeing how people have used their faith to take on really challenging
Mm-hmm.
um fights, right, where they have, these David and Goliath fights, right, where
Yeah.
they're
Right.
it's just, it seems impossible, and it's through their faith that they're able to take on it. So there is still a respect
Definitely.
for how that plays a role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, it's like I was mentioning earlier, it's like a matter of like one's theology. I think, and the way I encounter this, right, and a lot of other organizers. I was talking to a friend a while back where, he was working with farm workers in Florida, and, talking about like labor abuse and exploitation. And then, this worker was talking about his experience. And then my friend, who's an organizer, was like, kind of like agitating him, like, "Well, it's not fair. Like, what do you think about this?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's not fair, but God's got me. God has my back." And religion there, is the role of religion there is soothing when someone should be angry and upset, and take action. You know, religion is used to soothe, and sort of like, no, you're fine, because although your material conditions are bad, like your spirit is good, and that's what's important. Whereas, like, on the other hand, you can see, like, well, God is just, God is justice, and God doesn't want, his, the children of God to suffer, in the material way either. And God wouldn't want this for you as well. And I think that's when, the juxtaposition of how religion can be, can be looked at, and used in order to influence like how someone takes action or doesn't take action. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And again, it's like, it's not black and white. I think
Yeah.
there's a bunch of nuance to it.
Well, I want to get to because the way I I hadn't heard about Centro de Trabajadores Unidos, and which doesn't mean anything. I haven't really organized in a while, so like I really
Hmm.
don't know what's going on.
Right,
Like
right.
I can speak about stuff happening in like the early 2000s to 2010. Right now,
Hmm.
I'm kind of out of the
Yeah.
loop. But I heard about the work y'all are doing through the Southside Weekly, right? Like so,
Hmm.
um, the article was vaccine disparity grows in Chicago's South suburbs. Let's see. Let me shout out the writers, right? So it was Jacqueline Serrato and Alma Campos wrote this piece, and uh, one of the things I was talking about, obviously, right, in the title, vaccine disparities, but also about like the work that was happening in the suburbs,
Hmm.
um, and that CTU recruited health promoters to go out into the community. And so, first, I want to know, um, a was like this always part of like the mission, or was this like audible, right?
Hmm.
Just like a straight up like the pandemic hit and like we gotta
Yeah.
figure something out. And then two, like what is a health promoter, and like what was the work that was being done or is still being done?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I would say it's a combination of kind of both things. I think, organization Centro De Trabajadores Unidos, is focused on the southeast side, Chicago and the south suburbs, and our focus is on building power among immigrant and low wage workers in the area. And I think that looks like a number of ways, and that can shift how it looks. But when it comes to the health promoters, that was and it talks about it a little bit on the Southside Weekly article, but it definitely shifted a lot of the day-to-day work that we were doing. I think, needless to say, the pandemic affected low-income people, Black and Brown people the most, right? And so, um, these are folks who we're not going to start working from home, in their laptops or computers, because that's not the work that most of the folks we work with do. A lot of it is manual labor, a lot of it is in person, things that you just can't do. So a
Right.
lot of folks either lost their jobs or had to continue working through a pandemic that has killed a lot of people and is still killing people. And so, what the health promoters or like community navigators, we also call it, basically, um, it was born out of this need, right? We kind of shifted a lot where we're doing a lot of direct support, a lot of mutual aid, a lot of like just connecting people to like basic things, right? Um, One thing that the article alludes to, right, is just kind of like the resource disparities that exist in the south suburbs, and that's one issue, right? That like oftentimes, that when people think about the suburb, people their mind goes to like white flight, right? And
Hmm.
people they leave this, like wealthy people leaving the suburbs and creating leaving the city and creating their own like little like oasis, right? But reality of south suburbs is low income, is predominantly black and mostly Black and brown people live in the south suburbs. Yeah, and so what was needed, right? I think was people to be connected to COVID information, to testing, to vaccines, and so we have had we call community navigators, where basically what we do is we train people in the community um, on like we give them the most like up to date, accurate information that they can, specifically around like immigration and labor as well. So we'll have like meetings where we sit people down and we're like, here's what you need to know. Here's how to protect yourselves. Here's how to protect your community from like from ICE raids, from like exploitation on the job. Like we just give folks information, right, and answer questions, and it's just a space for education. But we also train them on how to speak to others about this, right? And we encourage that and want them, and because it's what folks naturally do anyways. And so we have been doing this for a while, right? This community navigators program specifically will focus around immigration and labor. And with the pandemic, right? I think like that program remained, and we were able to recruit more people to focus specifically, right, on this like health promoter like outreach, right? And so we already had a lot of these models like existing, right? So what we did is we just had the same kinds of meetings, right? And it was a lot of the same people as well, where we just had people sit down, and it was over Zoom, obviously, because that's how our work shifted as well. And we had folks had to like really adjust and kind of like learn how to do it, and so we train people on the most up to date information. And there's so much misinformation out there that it was really important. And I think what our work is about is very relational, and this is what I've seen in doing this, is that people are most likely to listen to others, right? If, like, if, this person got the vaccine, that's my brother, my whatever, like they're more likely to get it. And so just the fact that there were people in the community, it wasn't like an outsider, it wasn't like, someone from the government telling them what it was, but it was their own neighbors, their own cousins and brothers and whatnot. That was really effective. And yeah, so a lot of what it looked like was doing outreach, going to churches, like outside of carnicerias, and just like passing out flyers, passing out like information around the vaccine, like giving people masks and hand sanitizer, just like the yeah, just like connecting with folks and allowing to answer questions, because sometimes that's all it took for people to really get it and at least be aware of where we were at with this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you mentioned it in your answer, but just this idea of between the urban spaces and the suburbs, right? And especially like a city like Chicago that has such a long and rich history of community organizing. I feel like all the attention goes towards the cities, right? And I think of organizing in New York, in LA, and in Chicago, San Francisco. And I don't even know why that is, right? Because I feel like, I mean, if you look at the civil rights movement, right, we're looking at
Yeah.
the South, right?
Hmm.
If we look at the last election, Arizona, Georgia,
Hmm.
right? Like um, undocumented people go everywhere, right? They're not just like I can only go to the city. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's just like I don't know why there's that tendency to do that, but I don't know, like what's you tell me, like what's the case for like
Mm.
organizing in the burbs, right?
Sure.
What's the challenge, right? Of like I think of that famous like quote, right? Of like poor Mexico, like what is it? So far from God, so close to the US.
Yeah.
And I think of like the South suburbs in that way, right? Like poor South suburbs, like like so
Yeah.
far from God, so close to Chicago. Like what
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
dynamic like?
For sure. Yeah. And I think, it was clear, it's been clear. And again, I kind of talked about it, how like there's misconception, right? That the suburb means that there's more resources. The South suburbs is the opposite, right? And I think, it's like the legacy of segregation and racism in this country, right? That has pushed, Black and brown people south. Like that's, goes without saying. But I think what we see in the south suburb is like there is um been a trend, right, of people migrating, right, to the south suburbs to find like cheaper housing, to find more affordable just like living situations, right? And I think, yeah, there's like this imaginary line that is, yeah, it's like not real, but in many ways it is, because as soon as you pass that line, you're in a different municipality under different laws, under different like government, and it's just like just different, just like the minimum wage, right? We have $15 an hour minimum wage in Chicago. That changes as soon as you cross a line. And in the east side, we're even in like it's even more wild, because like we're next to Indiana, so that's like a whole different thing, right? We have community members in Indiana too, and they're like, there's nothing out here, there's no government support, there's nothing
Right.
that's gonna support people in Indiana. And so I we're in that space where we see a lot of that. So I think, there's definitely, there's a lot to say, but if you go to the south suburbs, and this is the first thing I noticed, right, driving down, just like the amount of food deserts that are out there, just the how far things are, how distant people are from many things, right? And even like I was just driving and I just needed to use the bathroom, and I was like, where's the closest Jewel Osco that I can just stop, like make a pit stop? And there was just like nothing out there. And
Mhm.
that's when I really realized it's like people really just have to travel everywhere to get something basic. And what that means is that they're just like not getting it, or getting, like lesser things. Also, people are really isolated. I think I've noticed this, where like, I'll visit a community member, do a one-on-one, and they don't have like the community, the friends and the neighbors that like that they might have, right? And if they're in a neighborhood where they've been a while and there's just like people out and about, there's just that isolation that's created by that. And yeah, I think there's and another thing that's like health, like there's just like anything that somebody needs, there's just like less There's just less of it in the south suburbs, and there's like no easy way to get to it. Um, so yeah, I think there's just huge need and huge disparities for folks in the south suburbs, and again, that's like different from the northern suburbs.
So I kind of want to know, for you, you have a few years organizing, right? Like you said, we started with
Mhm.
church and the 2016 campaign. And in those years, has there been a time that like you felt like quitting, or you felt like just like I need to do something else? Like if I don't know, are you going through that right now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's honestly, I don't know. Sometimes I want to ask the organizers, like, "Are you okay? Like, are you?" Because that's like constant for me, right? It's not something that I think the more conscious I become, like the harder it is to do this work because it's like really overwhelming, right? And so it's a constant, right? It's a constant struggle. It's not something that, I mean, there's waves of it where it feels worse than others, but the reality is that we live under these systems that are just like oppressing us, and the more aware you are of them, um, the more the harder it is, to navigate them because, like they say, ignorance is bliss, and you can just like ignore sometimes the ugly stuff. But yeah, I think it's hard. I think and that's why my focus and kind of like and I try to avoid like I think when I get most discouraged is when I start listening to kind of what's happening all around and just like allowing myself to be overwhelmed by that. I think
Mhm.
it's important to know to know, but we already know climate change is real. We already know that the effects that capitalism has on our on everything, right? And we know where this world is going. We know the rich are getting richer. We know all these things, right? There's nothing. I don't need to like look at Twitter every day and remind myself of it. And so I think when I'm most when I'm best mentally is when I can just focus on like the work that I'm doing. Aware that that is like important work that's leading um, to this larger fight, right? And so I think that's when I'm best, right? When I just focus on that. I think I get discouraged when I look at the big picture and it feels like we're not moving forward. It feels like we're not doing enough. Um, yeah, and there's times where like I get discouraged in my own work, right? My like again, my work is very relational, right? And I have one-on-ones with community members and like move people towards action in these like one-on-one conversations, and sometimes that can be frustrating too, right? I think and it could feel like because and that's also part of like the bigger picture, right? Because one thing that we're battling against is like the constant like propaganda and hegemony of like the ruling class that just affects so many things, right? And sometimes it could be frustrating talking to community members who like are convinced, right, that convinced of the lies that they've been told, right, about their job, working for the team. There are people who would defend McDonald's and
Mhm.
Burger King for
Yeah.
there's people who be frustrated, right, and they're not happy
Yep.
with their lives and their jobs, but they'd be like, oh well, like CEO deserves this money, or like they work hard for it too, um and like if I was just like better, I would have a better situation. And I think that can be discouraging. I mean, that's the work that I do, but sometimes like I'm not in those conversations and in that organizing. I'm going up against like this huge machine that constantly tells people otherwise, right? That constantly tells people like the rich are rich because they work hard, like you don't deserve this, like um or like this other person is a problem, right? A lot of like and all the work that I've done, right, the one constant the way that these systems have oppressed black and brown people. Oftentimes there's a knee-jerk reaction for them to like find each other as a culprit, right? Where that was often found in Fiverr 15, where people be like, well, it's those workers from who are a different color as me that they're the ones that I deserve it but they don't. Or like even people who like are saying like I'm the good immigrant, like those other immigrants should not get what like relief or whatnot. And that's often really hard, right? Because and that's what I'm battling with every day. But it's not just like these folks like coming to those conclusions themselves, but it's something that they're being told and convinced of, right, that it's not the ruling class that's the problem. It's my neighbor who's like different than me.
Yeah.
So that can be hard, and that can be sometimes be discouraging, but I know that can change, and I know people can come to their consciousness, um, in community. Whereas, the bigger picture is something that can be overwhelming if I look at it too much.
Yeah, I've said this before, and I've I often feel that like organizers can look towards educators, like towards teachers, like in the
Hmm.
in the public schools as like a model,
Hmm.
in the sense that like a teacher, you could sit down with a teacher for an hour, and 58 out of the 60 minutes they could tell you everything that's wrong. Right, like they're just complaining, 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 but yet you never question their like commitment toward their students or their belief in education, right? Like you know that a teacher, if you become a teacher, that most teachers, they really believe in education and that they really are doing the best they can for their students. But yet they also, teachers have, a lot of teachers have this way of like being able to hold those beliefs and at the same time just speak openly about everything that's wrong and like if they're burned
Hmm.
out. And I think organizers sometimes can be too cautious about that, right? Like I think you can believe in your community and you can believe in
Hmm.
the movement and also be like, hey man, this sucks. Like,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think as like organizers we're
yeah,
scared of doing that. We're
yeah,
like, we
yeah,
don't
yeah,
we don't we're just like, no, but I can't talk bad because like it's
yeah.
just like, no, if it sucks, it sucks, and you could
Yeah, yeah,
still think that the organization, believe in the organization, believe in the
definitely.
mission. And so like I kind of respect teachers for their ability to do that. I wish I was more like that. And the
Yeah,
more that I
yeah,
talk to organizers, the more I'm like, we really need to like
yeah,
use them as role models, because you I think you could say like, you know what, I want to quit, I hate this,
yeah,
and also still be like, I'm down for the cause, right? It's not like an
definitely.
either or thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I don't fault people. I think sometimes like, and this is one thing I'm learning about myself, and everyone's different, right? There's some folks who this affects differently. I think the way I am, my personality, this like affects me like very deeply. Like, I hear like I've been hearing horror stories for the past 2 years, right? Especially in this pandemic. It's like, and that just like it eats at you because you're holding like everyone's like traumas and like experiences
Yeah.
and like and not just like in an emotional level where like this terrible on a human level, and like I'm hearing the horror story that you're telling me, but it's like I can see this connected to like a policy decision or a specific person in power, and that just like not just like makes you really sad, or makes you really angry. And so yeah, I think definitely this is something that's really hard to do, and this is really hard to do for a sustained amount of time, and everyone's different, right? I think everyone needs a break every now and then, and yeah, I don't fault people for saying like, hey, I'm gonna step away for a little bit and do this different kind of work, and that's totally fine. Because we need, it's a marathon and a sprint. We won't fix everything tomorrow, but we just gotta make sure we stay alive until the end.
With CTU, the South Suburbs, uh, what's the big victory, right? What's the vision? When do you say my work is done?
Oh man. Well, I don't know if I'll like be alive when that happens, but that'd be cool if it's in my lifetime. But I mean, you know, um, I think what we're going towards, right, is you know, um, I think we Chicago, right, is a city where like there's a division, there's a line there that there's like this segregation, and so many things can come, it can be explained by that, and so many things like you can just see it, right? And what and in the southeast side and the south suburbs, right, it's a story of like disinvestment. It's a story of lack of resources. It's a story of poverty, of pain, of like people who are sick, people who don't have what they need, right? And obviously this is like a generalization, right? But this is true in many places and with many people. And I think what I would want is that folks can have the same things that people up in the north side, up in the north suburbs have, right? That people have like basic their basic needs met. they're self-sustaining, right? That when my work is no longer necessary, when I don't have to like agitate people around with situation, but that their situations are already met, and they've built their own systems. They've built People have built their own um like their own neighborhood councils, their own worker councils. They have built their own like systems in order to maintain like their basic needs, to maintain like healthy, thriving communities. I think when that's visible and we don't have to juxtapose one community versus another, but that we're all healthy, we're all safe, and we all have what we need. I think that's when my work is done. And I think that's like, I don't know if that's too general, but that's what we're aiming for, right? Is to no longer need to fight for basics, and that's what we're doing right now on a daily basis in many places. And when that's no longer necessary, right? When people can go to their doctor and get the right health care, when people can go and get the food that they need, right? Like just basic shit that right now is hard to do. Um, and more, right? Not just that, not just surviving, but thriving. I think that's when I can say, well, I did something good.